In this lecture, we are continuing with the remaining important and most commonly used methods of GSAP. First, we are going to look at the context method. This method will group the animation and will help us to revert the keyframes either by pausing it or reverting to its original state. Go to index.js and remove the stagger property from the to method and head over to index.html. Let us create a revert button at the top of the page. Inside the div, I'm creating a button with class revertbtn. This is in camel case and give it a name revert. Now go back to index.js and copy the create circle function. The idea is to have 100 boxes like the circle for the demonstration. Paste it and rename the circle to box. We already have the box class styled in the style.css. Copy the for loop and paste it right below and call the createBox function. This will create 100 boxes. Copy also GSAP.to method and paste it right below and replace the circle class with box. This way, both will have the same animation. Now let us create the context method. I am assigning it to a variable called context, and this equals gsap.context, and within the brace we add an anonymous function. In this function we will cut and paste in the animations that we created before. In our case, we are pasting in the two GSAP methods for circle and box. Now let us store the revert button in a variable called revertbtn. I will use this button to demonstrate both the kill and revert methods. Add an event listener to this revert button to listen to the click event. Inside the function add context.kill. This method will pause the animation at the specific keyframe where it listened the click event. All the animations within the context method were halted right at the moment when the click event was fired. Let me show you something interesting. Copy the URL and paste it in the browser. I'm clicking the revert button at the random point. Now go to the console panel of the browser. As you can see, the style attribute was filled with CSS properties. The reason for this is that the animation was paused and was killed at the point when I clicked the revert button. The kill method writes the CSS style of the selected element at the specific point to the style attribute. In our case, the elements are the circles and the boxes. The drawback of using kill method is that this may mess up your website's layout if you use CSS heavily. Now go back to our code and let us use the revert method and see what happens when I click the revert button. This will kill the animation and revert to the original state of the element as it was defined in the CSS. Go to browser and open the console panel. As you can see, the style was not added unlike the kill method. The next method we are looking at is the from method. This is like the to method, but everything moves the opposite. For example, in the to method, the scale property will scale from its original size, i.e. 1, to 0.1, which is 10% of its original size. But on the from method, the scale property will scale from 0.1 and it scales to its original size, that is 1. Another example we can see here is the opacity. In the to method, the opacity will go from 1 to 0. In the from method, it will go from 0 to 1. We can also set default property values for all the animations globally by defaults method of GSAP. In this example, I'm setting the duration to 5 as default for all animations if it is not defined locally within its configuration. As you can see that this doesn't affect our animation. However, if I remove the duration of 1 second from the circle animation, the time we set in the defaults will be applied here. In our case, it's 5 seconds. Whereas the box animation is still playing with the duration of 1 second because the default values were overridden by its local configuration value. You can set any property to a default value inside the defaults method. Now I'm changing the default value of duration to 1. Next, we are going to look at is the from_to method. Here I'm renaming to method to from_to. This has 3 parameters. The second parameter, we define the properties from which the animation should start, and in the third parameter, we define properties to which the animation should end. In this example, inside the third parameter, I'm setting the scale property to 1 and opacity to 0.5 and y value to 0, which means it translates to its original position. A little complicated part here is that the yo-yo and the repeat properties must be also defined in both the parents because the from part stops at the middle, so the yo-yo and the repeat properties won't get triggered when the animation enters to the second half, i.e. the third parameter. So in order to achieve this, we also need to specify these properties to both the parameters if we want to achieve these kinds of effects. If you may notice some kind of roughness here in the transition, this is because the ease property was applied to the from part and not to the to part. So like the repeat and the yo-yo properties, you would also want to add the ease if you want a smoothness to the animation. In our case, I am adding the parametric function to the ease property. The next property is the get property. This will allow us to get the value of specific CSS property. In our example, we are going to get the background color of the circle element. To do that, we type gsap.getProperty. Inside we specify the selector. In our case, it's the circle. And the next parameter is the CSS property that we would like to get value from. Like the jQuery, we camel case the corresponding CSS property's name. Since background color consists of 2 words separated by a hyphen, we remove the hyphen and capitalize the first letter of the second word. And as you can see, I am storing the output in a variable called bgcolor. Now you can log the output of the result. Go to the browser and head over to the console panel. You can see here the outputted result in RGB. This is equivalent to the purple color we defined in the style.css. Another example. I would like to get the border radius of the circle. Like before, we camel case the corresponding CSS property. In this case, it's the border radius. I'm going to console log the output like so. So the border radius we got is 50. Let's check this in the style.css to see if it is correct or not. Yes, it is. The border radius we defined was 50 pixels. The next method we are exploring is the isTweening method. This method returns a boolean value based on the state of the animation of the selected element. If the animation has stopped, or in other words, if tweening has stopped, it would return false, otherwise it would return true. For the demonstration, in the configuration of the box element, we add onStart property. This onStart property will be fired at the start of the animation. Let us check if the isTweening method is returning true or false. Here in the console.log, I'm typing symbol message concatenated with gsap.isTweening method. Inside, we add which element we would like to check. In our case, we like to check if the boxes are tweening or not. Heading to the browser, in the console panel, we can see that the tweening is true because the animation has just started. Now let's go back and change the onStart to onComplete property. This way we can check if the tweening has ended or not, because this will be triggered only after the animation ends. Go back to the browser to see our result. Oops, we can't find anything in the console panel. The reason is we have already set the repeat to -1, which will infinitely loop. So if we change that to a finite number or remove it completely, we would be able to see the isTweening returning false. For the demonstration, I'm removing the repeat and the yo-yo properties. And yes, now you can see the tweening is returning false.